it's not about number two. For me, like you can't go into a season with Bagent as your number two. Like that's irresponsible. But I don't think PJ Walker. I don't care how much money they paid him. I don't think that he's looked like he has earned the number two role. So to me, it comes down to: are you looking for a quarterback that gets cut, or is it between the Peterman and PJ to figure out who's the number two?
It's a good conversation because I think we'll learn a little bit about Ryan Poles and his willingness to consider that he's made a mistake. You know, when you do go out in free agency and you target a guy and you give him north of $2 million guaranteed, it's not a huge sum, but it's enough to say that we believe in you. And then if you don't get him to the opening day roster, that's an admission on you to saying like, I made a mistake here. We made a mistake here. That's going to go on my ledger. And so that'll be interesting to see kind of how they evaluate this. We'll see how much time PJ Walker's allowed to play on Saturday against the Buffalo Bills to change what has been his trajectory in the preseason. As Bagent goes, I know there's you get the mushrooming sentiment on social media that there's no way that the Bears are going to be able to get him through waivers. I had several conversations with people in the league over the weekend that say, look, you got to understand that there's nobody claiming a guy on waivers to be their third quarterback. So anybody that would claim Tyson Bagent as a quarterback would be looking for a backup. And
Right.
nobody in the league is going after a backup from Shepherd University that has spent the last 4 months with another team. So the idea that they're never going to be able to get him in the practice squad is a little misguided. I think that's probably the most likely landing spot for Bagent. And it's a good place for him to be because he's obviously shown them a lot here in the last few months that says, hey, I'm worth a longer look. And now, Lawrence, you ask a very good question on where's your head at in terms of what do you want to have in that backup role? I think one of the most underestimated things in the court of public opinion is how much of the pie chart in choosing your backup quarterback is how much can this guy be a resource to our starter while our starter is starting, and so that's something that the Bears have to consider as well is just what's the value of a guy that can help Justin on a week in, week out basis, prepare for the next opponent and take on some of his homework and help to streamline that. So it's a fascinating sort of decision they're going to have to make. And thankfully they'll make it in the next 8 days here.
Yeah, and help the defense by being able to be multiple enough to impersonate the upcoming opponent. There's some value in that as well. Hey, Dan, remind me about how practice squad deals can be structured perhaps outside of the letter of the law. Like there can be kind of a wink-wink deal where somebody could make considerably more than just a minimum practice squad salary, right? If you say, hey, stick around here, we'll develop you, where there have been guys who have actually, if I remember correctly, have turned down opportunities to go join an active roster because of promises that were made to a practice squad commitment.
I'll have to do a little bit more research on that because I think the salary structure is a little more uniform. I think when you get some of those turndowns is when opportunity feels like it's coming up the road and there's more of a promise of look, like I've been developing myself within this system, with this coaching staff, with this group, and I just feel like my opportunity to break through and get on the active roster here is going to be more beneficial than starting over somewhere new. But I'll look into that a little bit more and give you a better answer on that the next time we chat.
Let's talk about Teven Jenkins. What do we know? What are we allowed to know? What do you expect?
Man, Lawrence, like this threw me yesterday, and it threw me from a colleague, right? Like Brad and I talk all the time. And when he calls me up and Brad was taking his daughter to college last week and wasn't at the crossover practices, but was at the game. And he said, what do you remember about Teven at the crossovers this week? I said that Teven looked pretty good at the crossovers. And he even talked on Thursday night after the second crossover practice. And he looked so good that I asked him a question after that practice on how good has it felt for you this year for the first time in your NFL career to be on the field almost the entire time of training camp leading up to the regular season. And he's like, yeah, it feels really good. I feel like some of the things that I've done for my body are hopefully pointing me in a direction where I can stay on the field longer. And then you get this word from Brad yesterday that he's dealing with a leg injury that has the potential to go into October. And you're like, man, like I can't figure out when it started, what exactly it is, what the timeline is. And we've got a staff, coaching staff wise up at Haugh Hall that aren't going to give us a lot of answers. And it's just, it's a terrible setback for a guy that's had too many terrible setbacks in 3 seasons. We've gone over the numbers 100 times. He's missed 16 games in his career. He's played 11 games in which he's played more than 50% of the offensive snaps. those numbers are absolutely destructive to the resume of an offensive lineman in the NFL. That is an availability rate that is just not going to cut it. And so here we are again, and you have to just understand that the Bears are going to have to pivot. They're going to have to pivot, obviously, for the short term and figure out what their plans are heading into the regular season. And then they're going to have to pivot a little bit, understanding that this is a trend now, and this is not just a one-off. And as you start making long-term plans, you better start trying to find answers to that position long-term.
I always wonder with somebody with a history of back issues, when we hear any other body part, how much of it could still be that original back issue? You know, if there's got a sciatic nerve thing that's down the back of a leg, you know, when they just say leg, that's fine. But do we know for sure that initial problem has been taken care of?
Yeah, I learned a lot about the kinetic chain when I was covering college basketball at University of North Carolina, and their strength coach was like a professor of teaching me about the body and these types of things and the way these things go. I, at one point, experienced Achilles tendonitis that was completely unrelated to my Achilles, and is actually a weak butt muscle. You guys can laugh about that and say Dan Wiederer's
No. I totally. I've heard, I forgot which golfer. There was a golfer that had the same issue. That
he had to strengthen his glute.
Yeah, the glute wasn't firing, and it was causing everything else to do more work, and he didn't even know it.
Yep, brutal. And so you ask a good question here, because obviously Teven has been trying to get on the right side of this. He thought that the Pilates work that he'd been doing all off season had strengthened him to a point where even day to day, he was feeling better at the end of practices, was feeling better at the end of weeks, and being like, man, this is really, really helping. And then again, like, we just need more information on what exactly this leg injury is and why it already has a timeline internally of, you know, bleeding into the regular season, because that clearly tells you that it's not just your common soft tissue injury. And we'll see where it goes. Again, just mystifying, because Teven did look pretty good at practice the last time that he was on the field, and then he talked about it afterwards, and now here he is going to be missing probably when they start the season.
Let's say the season starts tomorrow. Who's earned the right to start in Teven's place?
Well, the question is Nate Davis starting? You know, if Nate Davis is starting and we think that he's healthy, then Ja'Tyre Carter is 100% earned the right to start on that other side. I know he'll be flipping sides a little bit more from what he's worked on during camp, but he's actually had a pretty promising July and August, and I think has earned some trust in there. So that would be your guy. Well, now, Lawrence, there's this ripple effect where the last time we saw the Bears practice, Cody Whitehair had to leave the field and didn't come back. We don't know enough about the severity of that. He looked okay when we saw him in person on Saturday night. The backup center, Lucas Patrick, the other guy that could possibly slot in at one of the guard positions, hasn't practiced really at all this month. So now you have this whole domino effect on the offensive line, which is something you absolutely did not want to have to be dealing with at a time where you're hoping to hit the runway for the regular season at full strength, and with the opportunity to do, as David O and I called it, launch the no excuses tour for Justin Fields and see where he's at in his development. Now you're reshuffling on the offensive line. That was a problem for all of 2022. You don't want it to be a problem for all of 2023.
I don't want to cut Terrell Lewis. Every time I see him, he looks like he keeps doing something that I know the Bears need done. Is he going to make the team?
I think so. And in live action, even from the hot dog laden press box at Lucas Oil Stadium, the strip sack that he had on Saturday night, it was explosive. You know, you saw him come off the edge, and then he did that Khalil Mack thing where it wasn't go get the quarterback, it was go get the ball, you know, and the more opportunities you have to make those plays, he's done them in practice. And now this is 2 preseason games where you got 3 sacks and 2 where the ball has come out. 100% that's got Matt Eberflus's eyes all over it. And I think he makes the roster. And so now you're talking about, you've got your frontline guys of Ngakoue and DeMarcus Walker. They really believe in the upward arc of Dominique Robinson. Terrell Lewis is probably your number 4. And so now you say, okay, heading into this week, where does that leave Travis Gibson? You know, and so that's a big question that we'll have to talk about as we get closer to roster decision day, which again has moved up then from where it used to be. And it'll be next Tuesday. We'll have the initial 53. And I would expect Terrell Lewis's name to be on there.
How would you assess how the rookie defensive tackles have played so far?
I've actually been more impressed with Pickens in the game situation and more impressed with Dexter in the practice situation, which is interesting because sometimes when the lights come on, it just goes a little different. There are times where Dexter's he's too high and he's just getting stood up too quickly, and he's not getting forward. And his entire purpose here with the Bears, and the reason that they brought him in is because they saw athletic traits to go vertically, not side to side. And he's got to be able to do that more consistently under the game spotlight. Pickens has shown you a couple times a sack against the Titans, really sniffed out a screenplay very well early on in the game.
Yeah, he did. He went slow, and he recognized what was being done, and rather than just charging headlong, he actually took a reverse pivot. It was nice.
It was kind of a key read, and then a great use of instincts. Then you come back and you take that guy down, and you go, okay, that looks pretty good. That hasn't flashed in practice, and so then you see it in the game, and you go, okay, this is something we can believe in. Look, I think they love right now. This is a guy we haven't talked about a lot in the last 6 months. They love what Andrew Billings is giving them up front at the nose. And they obviously think Justin Jones is a core piece of their front line. That gives you an opportunity now to situationally use these rookies and find where they're comfortable and basically set them up for success, which I think is a great thing for a rookie to be able to be put in situations when the regular season starts to be successful, because then that builds confidence, which then allows you to kind of get that growth catalyzed a little bit.
When it comes to who's starting at running back, is it Khalil Herbert, or does Roschon Johnson have an opportunity to take that job?
Man, they certainly are giving him a long enough look. They're going to use a rotation, and Luke believes very strongly in the idea of using a bunch of guys, at least 2, maybe 3, to terrible news for fantasy owners, but great news if you want to have a deep backfield that does things for you. One of my biggest questions for roster cutdown next week is, can they afford to keep 5 running backs if you consider Kari Blasingame a fullback as part of that room, which, he sits in that room and studies with those guys. If you are intent on keeping 5, well, now you've got the opportunity to use Herbert, Foreman, and Johnson in the backfield. You've got Homer as a special teams glue guy, and then obviously, as we've talked about, Blasingame as your fullback. That's a tough decision that Ryan Poles has got to make. I think that's probably where he'll ultimately lean, but it's an interesting one because that's a lot of backs to keep when you've got a lot of other needs to fill.
Dan, I've sort of embraced my role as an ongoing Jack Sanborn doubter. And as popular as he is, and as much as he fits the everyman thing and he plays with such a high motor, I see him take a lot of bad angles where he thinks he's faster than he is, or he overestimates his own speed, or at least relative to a ball carrier. And I'm wondering, how strong a lock does he have on the Sam position? Because I watched Noah Sewell move, and even this guy Walker that they got from Atlanta, I wouldn't mind if there. And I know there's a time and a place. I just think that he could be an ideal, versatile backup linebacker rather than a starter on a good defense.
With Sanborn, I think the questions going into the regular season, to your first question about how strong is his hold on the Sam job, are about his health and his ability to stay available after the injury that he's dealt with for the last, since the end of last season, and how quickly does Noah Sewell come along? Because this is a rookie who has got promising instincts. And when he gets out there, you see flashes of it, and you understand why they were attracted to him. He's had success in college as a blitzer and has that knack for being able to help your defense that way. And so I have no problem with where you stand on Jack Sanborn, because I think he's a great, cool local story, and he was a great starter for a 14-loss football team at the end of a season when they needed a starter to get them toward the finish line. He obviously didn't get to the finish line because he got hurt. But when you're trying to start to build toward being a contending team, a championship contending team, you got to find more talent, more athleticism, more playmaking ability at that spot. Jack Sanborn can serve a role for you, but you want your starters to be a little bit more elite than that. And so I'm kind of
you're feeling me on this. You're feeling me.
Sure.
Okay, good.
For sure.
So you talked about earlier the idea of Ryan Poles having to cut bait on someone like PJ Walker. Mm-hmm. Might he do the same for Velus Jones?
It's the same question. It's the same question in terms of how willing are you to take that L? How willing are you to say, like, okay, it may be a little bit different with Velus, because Velus is a draft pick and a day 2 draft pick that you want to give every opportunity to break through. And so it seems premature to not give him at least a second season to try to work through some of this, but you certainly should have concerns. Now he's hurt a little bit, and we don't know how much he's going to be able to get back on the field this week. He hasn't been able to catch punts. He hasn't shown enough to be a weapon regularly in your offense. So the question marks should be there. One of the things I love about Ryan is he has made it a priority to not surround himself with yes men. his front office. And so these conversations are had at length, and he has people that challenge him on things and has people that say, hey man, you might've got this wrong. And so those discussions will be lengthy, and they will be purposeful, and they will be had with a very sophisticated lens on what are we trying to accomplish as a football team. It's interesting because I think like my biggest questions to the roster cutdown day are, what do you do at quarterback? How many running backs are you going to keep? And what does the bottom part of that receiving core look like? Understanding that it's going to be more Mooney and Claypool as your top three. Ryan's got to figure that out here. And he's got 8 more days to figure it out with that group that he's got inside that building. And I'm going to be fascinated when we get to talk to him next week to ask some of these questions on what was it about certain guys that, because Equanimeous St. Brown, there's another guy.
I was just going to say, I mean, I know he's an elite blocker, special teams player, but he can't catch.
He's an average special teams player and a good blocker. And if you can't find another wide receiver somewhere, whether it's the waiver wire or the street free agency or somewhere that knows how to block, then you're doing it wrong, and you need your receivers to do more than one thing. And if you can't do more than one thing, then I don't know that you have a place here. Now, look, he has history with Getty from Green Bay. Maybe that gives him a little bit of a benefit of the doubt here or there. I just haven't seen anything from him last season or in camp that says this is an absolute can't touch guy. Chase Claypool is a really good blocker. He can be on the field for you when you need a receiver to block for you on running plays, and then find somebody else that can have that skill. There's thousands of them out there that can block a guy on a running play as a wide receiver. So that's a guy that I keep scratching my head. And with every play that he doesn't make, you scratch it a little more, where I've got this little bald spot on the side here because I've been scratching it so much.